Good evening, everybody. I hope you've had a great start in the new year. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to upload new videos for the past weeks. This was due to my PC deciding to give me a great Christmas present by destroying his main drive. Well, now everything is up to date again, and I'm looking forward to uploading new stories for you every week. So, without further ado, enjoy the story, and have a good night. The wind carried the scent of burnt cedar and snow as I approached the village nestled deep within the Nagano Mountains. Shadows pooled thickly between the skeletal branches of the forest, and the moon, pale and swollen, hung low in the sky. It was the eve of the Chinese New Year, and I had come at my grandmother's insistence to celebrate with our estranged relatives. The roads were treacherous this time of year, but duty called louder than my fear of icy paths and the strange tales that seemed to surround this remote hamlet. My grandmother had grown up here, in a place she rarely spoke of. Her letters to my mother, and by extension to me, had always been sparse and formal. Yet, last month, a sudden urgency had crept into her words. She begged me to visit. My mother dismissed it, shaking her head and muttering something about old superstitions. But I couldn't ignore the weight of her plea. The village gates creaked on rusted hinges as I pushed through. The path, illuminated by rows of red paper lanterns, seemed almost too inviting. The lanterns' glow painted the snow crimson, and the flickering light made the shadows dance like spirits celebrating their own kind of festival. I hesitated for a moment, gazing back toward the darkness of the forest. The wind whispered, low and mournful, but no other sound came, not even the cry of a distant crow or the rustle of nocturnal creatures. "Welcome," a voice rasped, startling me. An elderly man stood just inside the gates, his back hunched and his hands clasped over a cane that looked older than he did. His face was heavily lined, his eyes almost hidden beneath the folds of his skin. "You are her granddaughter, yes? The one she called for?" I nodded, too unsettled to speak. The man's lips curled into a smile that revealed yellow and uneven teeth. And without another word, he turned and shuffled ahead, motioning for me to follow. The village was quiet, unnervingly so. Though I saw the flicker of lights in the houses and faint shapes moving behind the thin rice paper walls, no voices reached my ears. Even the dogs that should have barked at a stranger entering their territory were silent. It was as though the entire place held its breath, waiting for some unseen signal. "This way," the old man said, leading me toward the large house at the center of the village. Its tilted roof sagged under the weight of snow, and the wooden beams groaned in protest. As I stepped inside, the warmth of the fireplace enveloped me, but it did little to chase away the unease that had settled in my chest. My grandmother stood waiting in the main room, her frail figure bent over a low table laden with offerings. Oranges, rice cakes, and a lacquered bowl of what looked like dark syrupy beans. She turned as I entered, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed almost too wide. "You came," she said, her voice trembling with relief. I was worried you wouldn't." "Of course, grandmother," I replied, bowing slightly. "But why was it so urgent? Mother didn't tell me much." Her smile faltered, and her eyes darted toward the old man, who had taken a seat near the door. He was watching us intently, his gnarled fingers tapping an irregular rhythm against his cane. All will be explained soon, she said, her tone evasive. But first you must eat. You must take part in the preparations. I sat at the table, my grandmother urging me to sample the offerings. The rice cakes were sweet, the oranges tangy, but the beans tasted oddly metallic, leaving an unpleasant aftertaste that I tried to wash away with green tea. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not just by my grandmother or the old man, but by something unseen. Something that lingered just beyond the edges of the flickering lamplight. After the meal, my grandmother took me by the hand and led me to a room at the back of the house. The air grew colder as we walked, and when she slid open the door, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The room was empty, save for a small black lacquered box that sat on a low altar. Surrounding it were more offerings, sake, dried fish, and a bundle of incense sticks that filled the room with a biting and musky scent. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A family tradition," she replied, her hands trembling as she lit the incense. "This box contains something very old, something very powerful. It protects our family, but only if we honor it properly." "Protects us from what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she began to chant softly, her voice weaving an eerie melody that sent chills through me. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, the corners stretching into darkness that the lantern's light couldn't penetrate. I stepped back, the air suddenly feeling too thick to breathe. The chant ended abruptly, and my grandmother turned to me, her eyes glassy and distant. "You must not leave this house tonight," she said. "No matter what you hear. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I didn't understand at all. She pressed her hands together in a gesture of prayer and left the room, leaving me alone with the lacquered box and the suffocating scent of incense. The hours crawled by. I sat in the room my grandmother had prepared for me, a futon laid out neatly on the tatami floor. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of wood settling in the cold. I tried to sleep, but my thoughts churned with questions and unease. And then, just past midnight, I heard it. A faint tapping at the window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. And then the tapping came again, more insistent this time. Slowly, I turned to look, but the shoji screen blocked my view of the outside. The tapping grew louder, almost frantic, and then it stopped. A moment later, I heard the unmistakable creak of the front door sliding open. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. "You must not leave the house tonight." But something compelled me to rise, to creep toward the source of the sound. My heart hammered in my chest as I slid open the shoji screen leading to the main hall. The lanterns cast their dim glow, but the doorway was empty, the snow beyond untouched. And then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the lantern's light, barely visible through the swirling snow. It wore a tattered robe, its face obscured by long matted hair. But its eyes burned like twin embers, locking onto me with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. It raised a hand, beckoning me forward. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. The figure tilted its head, as if curious, And then it smiled. The sight of its jagged teeth sent a jolt of terror through me, breaking whatever spell had held me in place. I stumbled back, slamming the shoji screen shut and retreating to my room. My hands shook as I locked the door, my grandmother's warning now a mantra in my mind. Do not leave the house. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it a sound that was almost laughter. The laughter lingered in the wind, threading its way through the crevices of the old house, like a ghostly melody. I huddled under my blanket, ears straining for any sound that might explain what I had seen. The figure, with its burning eyes and sinister smile, seemed burned into the back of my mind. It was like an after-image I couldn't shake. The hours dragged on. Each creak of the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind against the walls a fresh torment. But the true terror began when I noticed the scratching. At first it started faintly, barely audible over the howl of the storm. It was a soft, irregular scraping noise, as though something sharp was being dragged along wood. I thought it might be a tree branch brushing against the house. But then it moved. From the window to the wall, down the hallway outside my room. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I covered my ears, desperate to block it out, but the sound burrowed into my skull, relentless and maddening. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, an oppressive void that pressed against my chest. I waited, my breath shallow, my body frozen in fear. Then a sudden knock on my door shattered the stillness. It wasn't my grandmother's gentle tap, nor the deliberate thump of the old man's cane. No, this was sharp and insistent, as though someone was pounding with their fists. Who is it? I managed to whisper, though I already knew I wouldn't receive an answer. The knocking suddenly stopped, replaced by a voice, low and raspy, barely more than a whisper. Let me in. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Then the voice came again, closer this time, as though the speaker were leaning right against the door. It's cold out here. Won't you let me in? The handle rattled, and I scrambled back against the wall, clutching the blanket like it could protect me. Then the voice turned pleading, almost childlike. Please, I'm so cold. I shut my eyes, tears streaming down my face as I willed it to go away. And after what felt like an eternity, the rattling stopped. Then the silence returned, heavy and suffocating, but I dared not to move. When I finally found the courage to open my eyes, the faint light of dawn was filtering through the shoji screen. I crept toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and slid it open just a crack. The hallway beyond was empty, but a trail of wet, red footprints led from my door to the main hall. I followed the trail cautiously, each step feeling like it might be my last. The footprints stopped abruptly at the lacquered box in the back room. The offerings around it were untouched, but the incense had burned down to ashes, and the room was colder than ever. My grandmother suddenly appeared behind me. Her face was pale and drawn. You saw it, didn't you? she asked quietly. I nodded, unable to find my voice. She sighed, her shoulders sagging under a weight I couldn't comprehend. It's the spirit we've kept bound for generations. Every New Year's Eve, it tests us, seeking a way back into our world. That's why you were told not to leave the house, and not to open the door. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded, anger and fear boiling over. I could have been... Because knowing its name gives it power, she interrupted, her voice trembling. And once it has a hold on you, it's nearly impossible to break free. Her words did little to comfort me. If anything, they made the terror clawing at my chest worse. I glanced at the box, its black surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. What's in there? I asked. A piece of it, she replied, her voice barely audible. It's heart. As long as it remains sealed, the spirit cannot fully manifest. But if the box is opened... She trailed off, her eyes dark with fear. Before I could ask more, a loud crash echoed from the front of the house. My grandmother grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. Stay close, she ordered, dragging me toward the main hall. The old man stood by the door, his cane discarded. He was staring out into the snow, his face a mask of terror. It's coming, he murmured, more to himself than to us. I thought we had more time. My grandmother began chanting under her breath, her words rapid and desperate. The air grew heavier, charged with a strange energy. Outside, the snowstorm intensified, the wind shrieking like a chorus of voices. And then the laughter returned, louder and closer than ever. The storm outside raged, its howling winds mingling with the chilling laughter of the spirit. My grandmother's chant rose to a fever pitch, her voice cracking but determined. The old man near the door held his ground, though his eyes darted nervously between the shadows gathering beyond the threshold. I could feel the weight of something pressing down on the house. A presence, ancient and malevolent, like the air before a lightning strike. My breath came in short gasps, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The room was alive with tension, the shadows in the corners twisting and writhing like living things. And then, the door slammed open. Snow poured in, swirling in frenzied eddies, and with it came the figure from the night before. It was clearer now, standing at the edge of the lantern's glow. Its tattered robe flapped in the wind, and its long matted hair framed a face that was neither human nor fully animal. Those burning, ember-like eyes looked onto me again, and I felt my body freeze in place. It stepped forward, each movement fluid yet unnatural, like a puppet on unseen strings. And with each step, the temperature in the room dropped until my breath puffed visibly in the air. My grandmother's chant faltered as the spirit spoke. I have waited long enough, it rasped, its voice a mixture of wind and gravel. You know the terms, old woman. No, my grandmother whispered. Her voice was trembling but yet resolute. The bargain stands. The seal will hold. The spirit laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that sent shivers down my spine. The seal weakens with each passing year. Your bloodline grows thin, and your resolve even thinner. Its eyes shifted to me, and I felt as though it could see straight to my soul. But this one, she is new, untouched by your rituals. She could make the bargain anew. What are you talking about? I stammered, my voice barely audible over the storm. My grandmother spun toward me, her face pale. Don't listen to it! It lies! It always lies! The spirit tilted its head, a grotesque imitation of curiosity. Do I? It said, its tone almost playful. Child, they have not told you, have they? The bargain was made long ago to keep me bound. One life every 50 years. A sacrifice to keep your family safe. I looked at my grandmother in horror. Is that true? Her silence was answer enough. The spirit stepped closer, its smile widening to reveal jagged, blackened teeth. She will not tell you how many have died for her comfort. Her siblings, her cousins, always someone else. Someone younger. Someone expendable. Enough! My grandmother's voice cracked like a whip, her hands trembling as she raised them in a warding gesture. You cannot break free unless we let you. Be gone! The spirit laughed again, louder this time, and the force of it shook the walls. Oh, but she is curious now, aren't you, little one? Wouldn't you like to know the truth? Wouldn't you like to make your own choice, instead of inheriting the sins of those who came before you? Its words coiled around me, tempting and venomous. I could feel its gaze pulling at me, urging me forward. A single step, and I could reach it. A single word, and I could end the uncertainty. Stop! My grandmother grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't listen to it. We can rebind the seal. You don't have to do this. But what if it's right? I whispered, my voice trembling. What if we've been doing this for nothing? What if there's another way? The spirit's smile widened, and it stretched out a hand, its claws long and gleaming like polished obsidian. Come, it whispered. I can free you from this cycle. No more sacrifices, no more lies. Just one small thing in return. What thing? I asked, my voice barely audible. Your name, it said, its burning eyes locking onto mine. Speak your name to me, and the bargain will be complete. No! My grandmother shouted, yanking me back. If you give it your name, it will own you. Don't listen. The wind howled, and the lanterns flickered, their light dimming as the spirit stepped closer. My head spun with confusion and fear. The weight of generations pressing down on me. The burden of secrets and sacrifices I had never agreed to carry. Enough of this! The old man, silent until now, thrust his cane forward and began chanting in a deep guttural tone. The air around him shimmered, and the spirit hissed, recoiling as though struck. The shadows rifted violently, and the wind surged, but the old man held firm, his voice rising above the storm. Seal it now! he shouted to my grandmother. She nodded, her hands moving quickly as she retrieved something from her sleeve. A strip of paper, covered in intricate kanji. With a cry, she flung it toward the spirit. The paper glowed briefly before bursting into flames, and the spirit let out an ear-splitting shriek. The shadows collapsed inward, swirling around the lacquered box on the altar. The lids trembled, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it would burst open. But then the box stilled, and the room fell silent. The spirit was gone. For a long moment, none of us moved. The old man collapsed to his knees, panting heavily, and my grandmother slumped against the wall, her face pale and drawn. Is it over? I asked, my voice trembling. For now, my grandmother said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. But the seal is weaker than ever. Next time, she trailed off, her eyes full of sorrow. I looked at the lacquered box, its black surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. The air still felt heavy, charged with the lingering presence of the spirit. I knew then that this was not the end. The bargain might hold for a little longer, but it was only a matter of time before the spirit returned. And when it did, the choice would be mine to make.